Psalm 8, verse 3. If you recall, the psalmist has begun by praising the glory, the name, the majesty of God. Now he's going to focus in on creation. And even though this verse does, in a certain sense, stand alone, it's also perhaps kicking off a thought that will continue into the next couple verses. And so we'll have to hold a little bit of that for the subsequent videos. Let's begin by reading. Hati apsomai tous uranus, erga ton dactylon su, Selenein kai asteras, ha su ethemeliosas. We'll begin with this hati, and that's kind of what I'm getting at in terms of the way in which this verse partly stands alone, but partly introduces the next idea. Hati, of course, you learn in early Greek that sense because you could almost translate this more as when. And in fact, it's going to say, okay, when I do all this, then we're going to go to sort of verse 4 and 5 in terms of the implications of what the psalmist is trying to say here. So when or because, and then the first verse, or the first verb is opsomai, which is from horao. And you can see there's an S underneath the hood. It's switching, of course, to op in the future in this case with a omai ending. So this is a first singular future middle indicative. Horao often becomes middle in the future. And it's a future which is kind of interesting. So when I will see, or something like that. And so the Masoretic, at least, as it's been passed down to us, has a cal imperfect form of the verb to see. And often the imperfect, when it starts a sentence like this, will be translated in the Septuagint with a future. And so that's kind of interesting. It doesn't have to be translated that way, but the imperfectivity often in Hebrew gets translated, pulled through in a future form. So whether this is like a gnomic future or a sense of a typical pattern of a future, something like that is probably where I would land. But either way, when I will see the heavens, then he's going to clarify what he means by that. Erga, this of course is the accusative plural neuter from ergon, the works, and then ton dactylon there. Dactylos means finger, and so that would be fingers, the works of your fingers. And then he further describes, we're talking about the selene, notice it's still accusative, and that means moon. And then asteros is from aster, which means star. So the moon and the, notice this is plural, stars. And then we have a relative pronoun. Notice this is the accusative plural neuter. It's going to point back collectively to the moon and the star. In fact, really even all the way back to the erga. So these things which, and then we have su themeliosas. This is from themeliao. The noun form is foundation, themelion. But this is the verb form. You'll see with the sigma here, as ending and an e on the front end. This is a second singular aorist active indicative. So which you founded or established or something like that. So when I will see the heavens, the works of your fingers, the moon and stars, which you have made or founded, something to that effect. And so you can even feel with that translation that we're really waiting for the completion of the thought, which comes in the subsequent verses. But before we wrap up, let's just point out that even though there's no direct echo or direct allusion backwards here, I do think a lot of the language is drawing deeply on not only Genesis, but perhaps elsewhere. So for instance, this heaven here is going back to Genesis 1:1, the heavens. The stars, the asteros, are created in Genesis 1:16. Moon is actually not mentioned in Genesis 1 because it's simply called the greater and the lesser light. But obviously that's what's being referenced in Genesis 1. And then God finished his erga, so we see that. And even the fingers, we see echoes of that in Exodus as well, God writing with the finger, if you will. Of course, he doesn't have large fingers or anything like that. This is anthropomorphic language. But anyway, the psalmist here is reflecting on the entirety of the biblical witness to God's creativity. So kind of interesting that a lot of those words are really a vocabulary from the Pentateuch that the psalmist here is drawing on.